Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. Good afternoon, and welcome to a solo version of the Cut the Shit podcast. This one's always a little strange. I know I say that every time, but I don't do it enough for it to not become strange or not still be strange. So that's again the case today. We'll do the best we can to keep it interesting. Hopefully, I'll tend to keep it a little short too, for the purposes, since you're only going to be listening to just me drone on. That can get tiring quick. As my children like to remind me regularly. So I'll keep that in mind. A couple of housekeeping things. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a two-part series we'll be doing on the conversation between IT and the business internally. So we're going to talk to two guys from a company, one on the technology side of the house and one on the business side of the house. We're going to talk to them separately and kind of get each of their perspectives about how do they help make sure that they're framing up what they do in the context of what the business is looking for. And then on the flip side, have the person on the business side talk a good bit about what are they looking for from technology team, how do they measure or understand what it is that they're getting, and making sure they're getting value and meeting the needs and help them make the progress that they're trying to make on the business side. So hoping that'll be pretty interesting and a good way to kick off the second half of the year, which, to say that out loud, is hard to believe that the 4th of July will be next week, because I'm recording this on Monday, June 26th. So, just in time recording as it is, because we'll have to release this tomorrow. So you'll get this fresh off the press, so to speak. I've been thinking a lot about what to talk about, and I didn't have any great ideas initially. Again, I don't do solos regularly, so I don't generally am not in the mode of thinking about what would I just talk about that people might want to hear, especially in the context of what we're trying to do with the podcast as far as, the Cut the Shit theme. And so probably like a lot of you, I try to read books, in kind of the business realm, some technology, but mostly business really, and try to get better at what I do. See if I can find ideas to help that I can apply at Plow. And for some reason, I picked up an old book, a book I've read before, but I probably haven't read it in at least 10 years, maybe more, by Seth Godin, who's a very famous writer, speaker, marketing guru, if you will. And he's been around, he's been writing and speaking and doing his blog. He's like the most prolific blogger, I think, of all time. He's blogged every day for, hell, I don't know, it feels like 3 decades, since the medium began, which is incredible in its own right. But he wrote a book way back in 2005 called All Marketers Are Liars. And that was tongue in cheek, as we'll get to. But it was also updated in 2012. He's got a bunch of classics, if you will, and this is one of them. And I reread it. I don't even know why I grabbed it and started rereading it, and it kind of grabbed me. And I know why it grabbed me personally, because we are in the middle of sorting out and kind of thinking and maybe rethinking a little bit our story at Plow in terms of what's the story that we're telling about who we are, what we do. And this podcast is part of that, obviously, with Cut the Shit, and then thinking about that story and what does it mean, both to customers. Does it resonate? Does it matter? Do they care about it? And then do we as a business, are we authentic to that story? And that's easier said than done in a lot of ways, especially if you're trying to do something that's maybe somewhat unconventional or against the grain. And so we've been wrestling and struggling with that really the entire time I've been here, 2+ years now. But we're doing some things internally that have made me think about it more. And so the book seemed relevant, and so much so that I thought it might make sense to talk about it with you guys in the audience, because I think this idea that one of the key questions that the book sort of asks is, And the idea that what he's saying when he says all marketers are liars is what he means is all marketers tell stories, not necessarily just provide facts, figures, features, and benefits. And that really, if you're what consumers, business consumers, retail consumers, doesn't really matter. Everybody is looking for a story because there's too much information. And so the only way to really sort out what you want or what you think will meet your wants and not necessarily your needs, but more about your wants is whether stories resonate. So that's the idea. Maybe you believe that, maybe you don't. I think it's pretty compelling when I think about my own experience as a buyer and also as someone who's been on the other side in terms of trying to provide a service or a product to an audience. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, not really as a somewhat from an external standpoint, but maybe more in terms of internally and what, as it relates specifically to IT providers or technology providers inside an organization. What is your story, right? And you may think, well, that's kind of stupid. Of course, everybody knows what my story is. I provide technology. And I would argue that it's way more complicated than that. And it is more complicated than that, even if you don't realize it. And so if you don't think it's complicated, you should probably spend some time thinking about it, because this idea of what is your story can go a long way to helping you, I think, be better at delivering your IT services to your internal customers. And again, I'm trying to focus, I'm picking a specific example, and that's an internal IT department, not just one person. I don't want that's almost unfair for the person who has to try to be that individual. But let's a small internal IT operation. Maybe it's 3, 4, 5 people. A little bit of specialization. Maybe you got a network person. You maybe have an application support person, and then you've got some true kind of end user support folks who help your employees and your people make sure that their machines are working correctly, that they're getting access to the applications they need. That's password management, voice services, that kind of thing. So it covers a broad range, but your customers are really the internal business people at your company who are then providing products and services to whoever your ultimate customers are who pay you. So it's a sort of a little bit of a couple of steps, but realistically, your shop, your IT department is delivering services to internal customers, right? So keep that in your mind's eye as we think about this little conversation. I guess it's not really a conversation, it's a soliloquy because I'm by myself. But the idea I'm trying to have here is to think about this particular example with this idea of what's your story. So that IT department is doing stuff to help the business. So what's the story there? What is the story that the IT department is telling to its internal business customers? And that can be an explicit story. It can be how you communicate with those business units and tell them what you do and don't do, right? It can be as simple as that, like, here's exactly what we do, right? And that may be somewhat dictated by the leadership team. Your purview is X, Y, and Z, and you don't really color outside those lines. It might be that clear. It might not be. It might be, hey, technology people, you guys figure out what we need. You tell us what we need, and we'll let you know if it's working or not. It can be vague like that, which in some ways is good, in some ways is bad, because you've got a few more degrees of freedom to operate, to solve problems. It also means it's harder to know where to draw lines, because technology, as we talked about on this podcast before, has such a gigantic surface area, right? It covers so many things that if you say you're in technology, you aren't really narrowing it down much, right? In the sense of what might be in that other person's mind or what the definition of technology is. So the idea of what's your story has a couple of different elements. The first one, the obvious one I said, is your explicit story. So I'd start there. What are the foundational documents that you use to define who you are and what you do? And again, it could be as simple as a list of services that you're responsible for. But then it quickly gets into, well, how do you measure the success of those services? And are you measuring the success of those services? Again, could be as simple as, SLA metrics. Are you getting things to customers in a reasonable amount of time or an agreed upon amount of time? Do you have some feedback mechanisms similar to like what a customer satisfaction score might be for external delivered services? Are you asking people in the business units, how are we doing? Are you getting what you need? Maybe you're having regular sessions with the leaders of your business units to ask them, hey, are you getting what you need? What business problems are you having? And be looking for ways to perhaps leverage technology to solve some of those problems. Right? There's a bunch of ways to try to explicitly define your story, right? In the sense of what it is that you do for these business units, and then how do you know if you're doing a good job? So that's the sort of the, I guess I'd call that the primary level of what's your story, how you answer that question. But what Seth Godin's book goes into a lot of detail about the idea of authenticity and telling a good story, and a story that the reason a story is true, and he means true not necessarily factually, but true really means consistent and authentic in the sense of that all of the ways that a business operates support the story that it's telling to the marketplace. And he gives all kinds of examples of both what I'd call virtuous lies or virtuous stories about companies that are doing a really good job of crafting a story and then building really a business that lives up to that story in terms of its delivery. And he also tells some really negative stories about how businesses have told stories that weren't true to back up operational principles or operational practices that either they didn't want to change or were going to be too expensive to fix, or those kinds of things. So some sort of very unethical kinds of things. So he gets into that, and I'm not going to spend really any time on that, because I'm going to assume everybody out there is trying to figure out how to do like we are, right? How do you tell a story that is authentic, that customers care about, and that we can live up to in a way that works for everybody, right? We make money and customers are happy and excited about what it is that we're doing. And I think most of you are probably doing the same thing. So back to the internal audiences, trying to go beyond that top level story of here's who we are, here's what we do, and here's how we get graded, if you will. Try to push past that and think maybe a little more creatively around. Forget about the technology side of it for a second and just think about your company. What is your company trying to do in terms of the way you solve problems for your end customers? What is the ultimate bigger story that the customer is telling to the market, right? Whether that's a business to business deal or business to consumer, B2B or B2C, it doesn't really matter. How are you differentiating yourselves? How's the company telling a story that is authentic and that you can live up, that the company is working to live up to in terms of everything it does, not just technology, whether that's operations or sales or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Where does technology fit into that? How can you craft an internal story that aligns with the external story the company is trying to tell, and be supportive of that and really be instrumental to that, so that the business units see you as, hey, the technology people are really helping us try to win or be successful in delivering the services we provide or the goods or whatever it is. And if you can do that, right, then you're getting into that sort of sweet spot where you can position yourselves as not just, hey, we're just the technology guys, right? We keep the internet running and we keep the machines working, and anybody can really do that. It's not really that big a deal. Like, we just want to figure out how to make it as cheap as possible, because anybody can do it. You guys just happen to be doing it, and we're glad you do it, but it's not really special. And I guess I have to say I fundamentally don't believe that, because if that were true, that same script is the same for the folks at the business who do marketing or sales or other things. Like, you're just a sales guy. We could get anybody to do that. You're not really special. Or same for the marketing people, or same for manufacturing or operations. And I think they would all probably quickly agree, well, that's not true for us. Maybe it's true for you, but not for us. And I would argue it's not true for any of you if you're really working at your craft and trying to do a good job of aligning whatever technology services you provide to help the company make progress and be more successful in terms of the business side of the house. So think about that story that the company is telling and try to line your story up, the technology group's story up with it. And it's certainly possible that your company doesn't have a good story. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Or it could be disjointed, or it could be sort of vague, maybe not clear. If that's the case, that's fine. Think back again, try to really understand what it is that your customers, meaning your internal customers, your business units, what is it that they are trying to do? And even if they're cross purposes in certain places, that makes your job harder, but at least you can understand that and appreciate that. And then think about what's your story. And that's what's the story of your department and what it is that you can do to help them. And the last piece of that, and I haven't even talked about it at all, but I think it's really important, and we think about it all the time at Plow, and that is, what is it about the people and the systems that we are using that help us tell our story? And so that's back to lining up what you do with your story. And so I'll give an example. If you're an internal IT department at a company, and what you really think your departments are looking for and what they really need is speed. I'm just going to pick one. Like, I don't even know if this is a good example, but it's one I can work with. They're trying to get faster at delivering. They need faster turnaround times. They need the ability to generate ideas faster. They need the ability to get goods from point A to point B more quickly. There could be there's a bunch of different elements to speed, but let's just stick with this, right? So what they really are trying to do is speed. They think that's part of their story is, hey, kind of the Jimmy John's, we're freaky fast. Jimmy John's isn't all about speed, but that's kind of their hook, right? And they've sort of aligned, if you look at Jimmy John's, they've kind of aligned a bunch of systems around that. So in this case, for speed, if that's your company's sort of mantra, that's their story, how can you as an IT department align what you do to that? And that could mean making sure that you've got the right kinds of, you're hiring the right kinds of people who can buy into that. Like, you have to have people who want to be part of that story, right? If you've got people who are like, maybe they're good technically, but they're just really slow and they don't want to move quickly and make changes, they're probably not going to be very successful in your organizations, which is about speed, which is helping. You need more ideas faster. You need to turn things quickly. You need to figure out how to deliver laptops more quickly to somebody. You need to figure out how to shrink SLAs and solve tickets more quickly, or maybe figure out a way to apply automation to the support you're providing so that people can get solutions even more quickly for the 30, 40, 50% of routine requests that you guys are getting. It could take on all kinds of flavors, but you want to be able to tell a story, again, that aligns with the company story, but that also your internal components give you an ability to be successful at doing, right? And so it's both the orientation or the thought process to the way you approach your problems and the services you deliver, but also even to the point of, do you have the right kind of people on the team to do what you're trying to do? And so, in our case, we're trying to figure out how to do things. We're trying to simplify the business, try to simplify what happens in IT services. And trust me when I tell you, that is easy to say and really freaking hard to do. And it's even harder to do if you have team members who come from technical situations where everything is made really complicated, and it's the orientation or the mindset is a one of complexity. Because trust me, technology is plenty complex. There's no doubt about that. But what we're trying to do is to figure out, where can we make it simpler? And so we need people who can think that way and who want to think that way, who are excited about those kinds of solutions, because not everybody is. And that's okay. The complex people can go work somewhere else because complexity is somebody else's story, but it's not ours. And so I would challenge you to think about that in terms of your own internal delivery of technology. What's the story there, and how does it align with what your business is trying to do? Because if you can link those together and make that story authentic, right, that's a lie that happens to be true, to use Seth Godin's language and kind of bring it back to the All Marketers Are Liars book. So that was maybe a little more than you wanted and somewhat rambling, but I did think it was important. It's something that's been on my mind. And I think, from back in the day when I was a CIO, I probably would have been better served if I'd spent more time thinking about the way we delivered our services to our internal customers, and were we aligning with the company's story? How well were we doing that? We did that some, but probably not as well as we should have. And so I think that'd be the challenge I would lay before you if you're running a technology shop internally, or you're the business person responsible for IT in your company. Try to have those questions and see if you can lay out some challenges for the team to do that. I guess lastly on that, the related to that is the operational structure in which you're delivering delivering your services. The structure that you have for either for your broad organization or particular, again, we'll keep it particularly or specific to technology, to the IT department. How you set your department up can have a big impact on your ability to be authentic in terms of delivering services in accordance with what your story is. And we're in the process right now at Plow. We're a 40-person company. We're pretty small. We have some larger customers, and we have a variety of services that we provide to most of our customers, not all, but most. And so it's very possible for a customer of ours to have to interact with a variety of different people inside our organization. And we've structurally had the company set up a certain way that made some sense in some ways, and other ways it didn't. And I think in a lot of ways, I don't think it was doing a good job of aligning us to this simplicity mantra of cut the shit that I just talked about, and that we talk about on this podcast a lot. And so we're taking a hard look at that and looking at what can we do to maybe to restructure a bit. Again, it's a 40-person company, so restructuring is not. This is it's not Walmart restructuring. This is something that can be done. It's a lot easier for us to do, but it's still a change. It means potentially moving people to new managers, teams of technical people working together who weren't previously working together. So it has the potential for disruption, but I think good disruption, because again, if you take this idea seriously of what's your story, and if our story is cut to shit and simplicity, then we have to find a way to align what we're doing with that mantra, with that story. Or at the very least, if something we're doing is inhibiting our ability to deliver against that, we have to fix it. And so that's kind of where we are with that from an operational perspective. And I guess I'd say to you, as you're listening to this, you might want to take a look at the way your organization, the way you have your IT department set up, because in general, you probably have a lot of control over that. You may not have the right pieces on the chessboard, so to speak, if you decided to make some changes, which could mean hiring or changing personnel. But regardless, taking a look at what you're doing and how you've got the team set up, or the teams set up, and making sure that you set them up in such a way to deliver against the story you're trying to tell, I think it's really important. And it doesn't necessarily stay the same, because we've had the same structure for about a year or so, and we felt pretty good about it for the first 6-9 months, and we've kind of gotten to this point and all of a sudden realized, like, wait a minute, this might actually be getting in our way some. I don't know that it's helping us. We thought we had some, maybe if we just had more kind of an account management role, or sort of a primary point of contact for a customer, that would solve the problem. And don't get me wrong, we're doing that because we need that too. But we figured out that that's not the only issue. That some of the structural stuff is causing some problems for us. And so, that's maybe more information than you wanted, and I opened the kimono, so to speak, a bit. But it flows to me. It makes sense to talk about it because it's related to this idea of what's your story. And I keep coming back to that question because I think it's such a good question to ask. Really, it's a fundamental business question. It's framed as a marketing question, but it is not just a marketing question at all. It has some marketing aspects to it, but it's really broader than that, as you can see, because for us, it's got us down a rabbit hole of looking at operations, looking at team structures, looking at job descriptions, who's doing what, even down to compensation and metrics, and incentives. So all that goes together around this question of what's your story. So I hope that's helpful. Again, the book this is not a book review. It's more of I used it as a jumping off point. But if you haven't read it, it's called All Marketers Are Liars. Again, it was first written in 2005. There was an updated version, I believe, in 2012. where the title, the cover's changed a little bit. It says all marketers are liars, and they've struck through liars and said tell stories. So all marketers tell stories, because that's kind of that's what the whole book was really about anyway. The title was just meant to be provocative, and it was. So that's kind of what I had to offer today. I guess lastly, I'd just say, middle of the year, like I said, I can't believe we're halfway through. But for us, we try to take a good look at what we've been up to for the first half, and then what kinds of changes do we want to try to make as we head into the second half of the year, sort of like a halftime review in a football game. Do we want to make any adjustments, and that's sort of what I was describing to you about some of the operational stuff for us. I hope that you find yourself in a situation to be able to do that kind of analysis. I think talking to your business partners, your internal customers, is really key. If you're not already talking to them all the time, you should be. But at the very least, talk to them, every quarter, or certainly, every 6 months, and find out again, what's their story? What are they trying to tell to the market? Where do they feel like they're struggling to live up to that story? And see if you can align your story and your processes to help them do that. Because if you can, your company will be more successful, and you will be more successful in your role. So that's kind of a win-win for everyone. So with that, I hope everyone has a great 4th of July. And again, we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks with a 2-part series on the upcoming. Thanks. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok at CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel at Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.